I never thought my daily commute could turn into a nightmare, but it did. It happened on a Friday evening when the city seemed more chaotic than usual. The trains were packed tighter than ever, and I was desperate to get home after a long day. The smell of sweat and stale air filled the subway car, and I could feel my own skin sticking to the cold metal pole I held onto. The man got on at the station after mine. I noticed him immediately because he was staring. Not the fleeting glance that most people give you before looking away, he kept his eyes locked on me. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it. Maybe he was zoning out, looking in my direction, but not really seeing me. But then I shifted to the side, trying to blend into the sea of tired commuters, and his head turned slightly to follow. That's when I knew. He moved closer at the next stop. The train jolted as it started again, and he used the momentum as an excuse to grab the same pole I was holding. His hand brushed mine, and I pulled away so quickly that I almost lost my balance. I wanted to tell myself it was an accident, but the way his fingers lingered just a second too long made my stomach twist. I thought about moving to another car, but the train was packed, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he already knew I was scared, that kept me frozen. I tried to focus on the advertisements above the windows, the announcements crackling over the intercom, anything but him. But I could feel him watching me. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest. When the train pulled into the next station, I saw a glimmer of hope. More people boarded, pushing and shoving for space. I thought that maybe I could lose him in the crowd, but he stepped closer instead. The new passengers forced me further into the car, away from the doors. I was cornered now, stuck between him and the metal barrier near the seats. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, hot and too close, as he leaned in slightly. He muttered something under his breath, but the roar of the train drowned out the words. I didn't want to know what he was saying anyway. I scanned the car, looking for anyone who might help, but everyone else seemed oblivious. Most people were glued to their phones or staring blankly into space. A couple of teenagers were laughing at something on their screens, their laughter too loud and carefree, like they were in a different world. I wondered if anyone would even notice if something happened to me. He shifted his weight, and I felt his arm brush against mine. I flinched, pressing myself as close to the barrier as I could. My mind raced with excuses. Maybe he was just a weird guy, someone with no sense of personal space. Maybe I was overreacting. But then he leaned in again, his voice just low enough for me to hear this time. He said something about how crowded the train was, and how people could get so easily lost in the shuffle. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way he said them, like he enjoyed seeing me squirm. I tried to remember what self-defense tips I'd read online. Keep your keys between your fingers. Go for the eyes or the throat. But there was no room to move, no space to even raise my arms. I felt trapped, like a rabbit caught in a snare, waiting for the inevitable. When the train stopped again, I saw my chance. The crowd shifted, people shuffling off and on, and I used the chaos to push my way toward the door. My stop was still 2 stations away, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of that car. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the announcements. I stepped onto the platform and tried to blend in with the crowd, walking quickly toward the stairs. I hoped he wouldn't follow, but when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was just a few steps behind me, his eyes locked on me like a predator tracking prey. I thought about running, but I didn't want to draw more attention to myself. I tried to stay calm, weaving through the sea of commuters and hoping to lose him in the maze of tunnels. But every time I turned a corner, he was there, just close enough to keep me in sight. My phone felt like a lifeline in my pocket, but I didn't dare stop to pull it out. I couldn't afford to slow down. I kept moving, my legs shaking with every step, until I spotted a group of transit workers standing near one of the exits. I forced myself to walk toward them, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I figured their presence alone might be enough to scare him off. When I glanced back again, he was gone. Just like that. 1 second he was there, and the next he wasn't. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was over, that he had given up and gone back to whatever dark corner he came from. But a part of me knew better. I took the long way home that night, avoiding empty streets and dark alleys. Even when I finally walked through my front door, locking it behind me, I didn't feel safe. I kept expecting to see his face in the window or hear his footsteps in the hall. That was weeks ago, and I haven't seen him since. But every time I get on the train, I feel his eyes on me. I find myself scanning the crowd, looking for familiar faces, and wondering if he's out there, waiting for the right moment to corner me again. The city feels smaller now, its shadows darker and more dangerous. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I never thought a bus ride could change how I looked at the world. It sounds dramatic, I know, but it's true. This happened a few months ago, and I still can't get it out of my head. I've been replaying every detail ever since, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, something that would have made it all feel less terrifying. It was late at night, and I had just finished a shift at my part-time job. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that makes your legs heavy and your mind foggy. The bus stop was almost deserted, except for an older man sitting on the bench and a woman scrolling on her phone. I remember feeling relieved when the bus finally pulled up. It was one of those older models, the kind that rattles and creaks like it might fall apart any second. I stepped on and found a seat near the middle, far enough from the back to avoid any sketchy characters, but not so close to the front that I'd stand out. I had my headphones in, not listening to anything, just using them as a barrier to keep people from talking to me. At the next stop, a man got on. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, even though it wasn't cold. Something about him caught my attention right away. He wasn't looking around like most people do when they board. His eyes went straight to me, and he stared for just a little too long. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything, that maybe I was being paranoid. He walked down the aisle slowly, his steps almost deliberate, and sat in the row directly across from me. Not behind, not in front, but perfectly level with me. He didn't take out his phone or look out the window. He just sat there facing me, his body slightly turned so that I could feel his gaze even though I wasn't looking at him. I shifted in my seat, pretending to adjust my bag, but really I was trying to figure out what to do. The bus was mostly empty, just a handful of people scattered throughout. Nobody seemed to notice anything unusual. I thought about moving to another seat, but that felt like it might provoke him somehow. Instead, I stared out the window, hoping he'd lose interest. He didn't. At the next stop, a few more people got on, and I let myself relax a little. Safety in numbers, right? But then I saw him move. He stood up casually like he was going to get off, but instead, he walked to the seat directly behind me. I could hear him breathing slow and steady, like he was trying to make sure I knew he was there. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he just liked that seat better. Maybe this had nothing to do with me. But then I felt a faint tug on the back of my hoodie, like he was testing the fabric. I froze, my hands gripping the strap of my bag so tightly that my knuckles ached. I thought about turning around, about saying something, but the words caught in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if I made a scene and embarrassed myself? Or worse, what if I made him angry? The bus lurched forward, and I felt his foot tap lightly against the back of my seat. Not an accidental bump, but a deliberate tap, like he was trying to remind me that he was there. My chest tightened, and I started to calculate how many more stops until mine. 3. I just had to make it 3 more stops. The second to last stop came, and I almost got off. I thought about it, but the area was dark and empty, with no one around except for the shadows of closed storefronts. I decided it was safer to stay on the bus, where at least there were other people. When my stop finally came, I felt his presence behind me before I even turned around. He was following me. I stepped off the bus and onto the sidewalk, my heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out the sound of the bus pulling away. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him, just a few steps behind, his hood still up and his hands shoved into his pockets. I walked faster, trying to look confident, like I knew exactly where I was going. I hoped he'd see that and give up. But he didn't. He matched my pace, staying just far enough behind to make it clear that he wasn't in a hurry. I turned a corner, thinking maybe I could lose him, but he was still there. I could feel my chest tightening, my breaths coming faster as I tried to figure out what to do. My apartment was only 2 blocks away, but the thought of him knowing where I lived made my skin crawl. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the empty parking lot. I decided to go inside, thinking it would be safer to be around people, even if it was just a cashier. As I reached the door, I glanced back again. He was gone. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the door handle, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had turned down another street. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, blown it out of proportion because I was tired and on edge. But then I saw him again, across the street, standing under a broken streetlight. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I stayed in the gas station for what felt like an eternity, pretending to browse the shelves while keeping an eye on the door. Eventually he disappeared, and I waited another 20 minutes before I finally left. When I got home, I locked every door and window and sat in the dark, my mind racing. I don't take the bus anymore, even during the day. People tell me I'm being paranoid, that it was probably nothing, but they didn't see the way he looked at me, or feel the way my chest tightened every time he got closer. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone into that gas station. Would he have followed me all the way home? Would he have done something worse? I'll never know, and honestly I don't want to. I think I was being followed last night on the train. I can't stop thinking about it, so I'm writing it down here to see if maybe putting it into words will help. I was coming back from visiting my sister, who lives a few towns away. It was a longer trip than I'd planned, and by the time I got to the train station, it was almost midnight. The platform was nearly empty, except for a guy in a baseball cap sitting on a bench and a couple standing further down, talking quietly to each other. When the train pulled up, I got into one of the middle cars. It was old and dimly lit, the kind of train that feels like it belongs in a different decade. I picked a seat near the middle of the car, not too close to the doors, but not all the way in the back either. It felt safer that way, though I didn't know why. There was only one other person in the car with me, a man sitting by the window a few rows ahead. He was slouched down, his head tilted like he might be asleep. I put in my earbuds, but I didn't play anything. I just wanted to look like I wasn't paying attention to anything around me. At the next stop, the guy from the platform with the baseball cap got on. He walked down the aisle slowly, looking at each row as he passed. I felt him glance at me as he walked by, but he didn't stop. He sat down in the back, far enough away that I couldn't really see him unless I turned all the way around, which I wasn't about to do. I tried to relax, telling myself it was nothing. People take the train at night all the time. There's nothing weird about someone sitting in the same car as me. But then I noticed that the man in the window seat ahead of me wasn't slouched anymore. He was sitting upright, staring straight ahead. I don't know when he'd moved. It felt like 1 second he was out of it, and the next he was completely alert. The train moved again, the dull hum of the tracks the only sound. I stared out the window, trying not to look at either of them. I couldn't shake the feeling that the guy in the cap was watching me, even though I couldn't see him. It was like I could feel his eyes on the back of my head. The next stop came, and the couple from the platform got off. That left just me and the two men. The car felt too big, too empty. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that I was imagining things. But then the man ahead of me stood up. He didn't leave at the stop. Instead, he moved to the seat across the aisle from me. He didn't say anything or even look directly at me. He just sat there, his hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. I felt my stomach tighten. I tried to act like I didn't notice, like it wasn't strange, but my pulse was racing. I glanced at the reflection in the window, trying to see if the guy in the cap had moved. He had. He was closer now, sitting just a few rows behind me. I realized they were boxing me in. One in front, one behind. I started to panic. I thought about getting off at the next stop, but what if they followed me? The station would be empty this late. At least on the train I had some space. I thought about moving to another car, but I'd have to walk past the guy behind me to do it. I was trapped and they knew it. The man across from me leaned forward slightly, just enough to make me notice. He didn't say anything, but his movements felt deliberate, like he was waiting for me to react. I stared at the window, pretending I didn't see him, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Another stop came and went. Nobody got on. The man behind me coughed softly, almost like he was letting me know he was still there. I felt my palms sweating, my fingers gripping the edge of my seat. I couldn't think straight. I started counting the stops until mine. 3 more. I just had to make it 3 more stops. I told myself that once I got off, I'd head straight for the station exit. There were cameras there, and maybe a security guard. That thought was the only thing keeping me calm. At the next stop, the man across from me stood up. He didn't leave. He walked past me, so close that I could feel the air move, and sat down directly behind me. Now they were both behind me. I felt paralyzed. I wanted to turn around, to yell, to do something, but I couldn't move. I kept telling myself that if they were going to do something, they would have done it by now. That thought didn't help. The train pulled into the next station. 2 stops to go. I almost stood up, almost ran off the train, but I stayed frozen in my seat. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing with what-ifs. As the train pulled away from the platform, I felt something brush against the back of my head. It was subtle, like someone lightly tugging a strand of my hair. I whipped around, but the men were sitting still, staring straight ahead like nothing had happened. The last stop before mine came, and I stood up. I told myself I'd be okay if I just stayed near the exit. I moved to stand by the doors, clutching my bag like it was some kind of shield. Neither of them moved. When the train finally pulled into my station, I bolted. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I ran straight to the nearest exit and into the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I got to my car. I sat there for a long time, locking the doors and staring at the entrance to the station. They didn't follow me. I didn't see them get off, but I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that maybe they let me go on purpose. I still take the train sometimes, but only during the day. I can't stop thinking about how easily it could have gone differently, how easily they could have cornered me if they wanted to. I wonder what they were waiting for, and that thought terrifies me more than anything else. I should have taken a cab. That's what I keep telling myself every time I think about that night. But a cab felt too expensive, and the bus was right there. It was late, but not so late that I thought anything strange would happen. The city is always moving, right? People everywhere, lights on every corner. But that night, the streets felt empty. I was coming back from a friend's party on the other side of town. I wasn't drunk or anything, just tired and eager to get home. The bus stop wasn't far from where I'd been, and the route took me close to my apartment. It seemed perfect. The bus pulled up, and the doors opened with a hiss. I stepped on and saw only a few people scattered through the seats. A man with a scruffy beard sat near the front, mumbling to himself. A woman was slumped over with her arms crossed, asleep or pretending to be. In the back corner, there was another man, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. I picked a seat in the middle, far enough from the muttering guy and the hooded man, but close enough to the woman that I didn't feel completely isolated. The bus rumbled back into motion, the city lights streaking past the windows. At first, everything seemed normal. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through random apps to kill time. But then I noticed the man in the hoodie shifting in his seat. He wasn't looking at his phone or out the window. He was looking at me. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just being paranoid. But every time I glanced in his direction, his head was tilted slightly, just enough to make it clear he wasn't looking anywhere else. I thought about moving closer to the front, but the mumbling man was still there, and he'd started tapping his fingers on the seat in a weird rhythm. The bus stopped again, and 2 more people got on, a young couple, laughing quietly to each other. They sat near the front, oblivious to anything else happening. I felt a little better with more people on board. But then the hooded man stood up. He didn't move toward the door. He walked down the aisle slowly, like he was taking his time, and sat down a few rows behind me. I could feel him there, his presence like a weight pressing against my back. The bus kept going, the streets getting darker as we moved further from the city center. I tried to focus on my phone, but my hands were shaking. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People move seats on buses all the time. Maybe he wanted to be closer to the door. The next stop came and the young couple got off, still laughing as they disappeared into the night. That left just me, the hooded man, the mumbling guy, and the woman who hadn't moved since I got on. I thought about getting off too, but my stop was still a few minutes away, and the area didn't look safe. I decided to stick it out. The bus doors closed, and we rolled forward again. The man behind me coughed softly, like he wanted me to know he was there. I didn't turn around. I focused on the ads above the windows, reading them over and over like they held some kind of answer. Then I felt it. A shift in the air, like someone leaning too close. I glanced at the reflection in the window and saw him. He had moved to the seat directly behind me. His hoodie cast a shadow over his face, but I could see his hands gripping the edge of the seat in front of him, my seat. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just moving again. People do weird things when they're tired, right? But then he leaned forward, close enough that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I didn't know what to do. I thought about standing up, about shouting, but my voice felt caught in my throat. The mumbling guy was still near the front, tapping out his strange rhythm. The woman hadn't moved at all. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare where nobody else was real. The bus slowed down for another stop. I thought this was my chance. I grabbed my bag and stood up, moving toward the door. But before I could reach it, the hooded man stood too. He wasn't in a hurry. He just moved, like he had all the time in the world, keeping the same distance between us. I didn't know what to do. Getting off meant he'd follow me. Staying on meant he'd still be there, watching me. The doors opened, and I hesitated for a second too long. The driver didn't wait. The bus jerked forward again, and I stumbled back to my seat. The man sat down too, closer this time, just 1 row away. I thought about asking the driver for help, but he was behind the glass partition and looked like he didn't want to be bothered. The mumbling man had started humming now, a low, tuneless sound that made my skin crawl. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. At the next stop, I'd get off and run. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed to get away. When the bus slowed again, I bolted. I didn't look back. My feet hit the pavement, and I ran toward the nearest streetlight, my bag bouncing against my side. I thought I'd made it, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't stop to look. I just kept running, turning down side streets and alleyways, hoping to lose him. The footsteps eventually faded, but I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment building. the door locked behind me. I don't know what he wanted or why he followed me. I haven't taken the bus since, and I don't think I ever will again. That night still haunts me, the memory of his breath on my neck and the way he moved without hurry, like he knew I had nowhere to go. There was something.